But here's the amazing statistic. They just rated the happiest countries in the world. The top 3 are Scandinavian countries. Okay, no conflict, just sit back. And number 4 is Israel. Number 17 is the United States of America. How is that possible? How is it possible that a country that deals with Palestinian terrorism, Islamic jihadist attacks from all around our borders, not an easy place to live? Because they're living a life of meaning, to live a life of purpose, and we see those challenges as just there to make us even closer to God and make us greater people.
Welcome to the Dr. Jeff Show podcast. Every week, I interview major thought leaders from many fields of influence to show how our worldview changes everything. You can find this show on lots of platforms: Liftable, Edify, Apple, Spotify, wherever podcasts are found. Today, we have a bonus episode for you with Rabbi Dov Lipman. This is a conversation that Rabbi Dov and I had at a national gathering of religious leaders recently in Orlando. He's a former Israeli politician, served as a member of the Knesset between 2013 and 2015. He writes for the Jerusalem Post and the Times of Israel and hosts a weekly radio show called One Nation with Dov Lipman. I get to ask him a lot of tough questions, and our conversation was fascinating to me. I hope you enjoy it. Dov Lipman, welcome to the Dr. Jeff Show podcast.
It's great to be with you.
Now, Dov, this is such a great time here at the National Religious Broadcasters, and you're doing a lot of events and interviews and speaking and things like that. And of course, we have this really cool view out the window of Orlando in the background and Disneyland somewhere around here. But we're here to have some great messages about what God is doing in the world, and that is something I'm so excited to visit with you about. Because with your work in Israel, you've gotten a really interesting perspective on the role of Israel in God's narrative through time. And a lot of our listeners or viewers are evangelical Christians, and they don't have many opportunities to hear from someone who's Jewish about that. So tell us some of the things you find fascinating.
So I'll get started with my own personal story, which was a person who grew up in the United States of America, grew up in Silver Spring, Maryland, lifelong Redskins, Orioles, Capitals, Bullets fan, now Wizards, and all these name changes because we have to be all PC, but that's my background. And in 2004, found an awakening to make Israel my home. Mm-hmm. And I had to call my grandmother to tell her they were moving to Israel. Can you imagine calling your grandmother and saying, I'm picking up with my children and moving thousands of miles away? And I was so nervous. My grandmother's a Holocaust survivor, and she's enjoying her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren. Now we're going to move far away. And I pick up the phone, and I shared the news with her. God willing, this summer, we're making Aliyah, which means ascending upwards, moving to Israel. And I was prepared for a pretty rough reaction from a grandmother.
Yeah.
And my grandmother responds and says in Hebrew, "Blessed art thou, Lord of our fathers, who has kept me alive and brought me to this great day."
Wow.
Took my breath away. And it made me realize that was the first awakening that I had of the magnitude of what's happening here. Here's a woman who was in Auschwitz, and she survives that hell, and she celebrates the fact that her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren are moving thousands of miles away because she understands that this is the work of God and God fulfilling his promises of the Bible of the ingathering of the exiles. You open up a Bible and it talks about we'll be scattered to the four corners of the earth, and a time will come when we'll come back home. And people of faith for thousands of years believed that. We'll believe it. We don't have to believe it anymore. It's happening right in front of our eyes, and she gave thanks to God for that. And I'll go one step further. July 2004, we drive up the New Jersey Turnpike, go to JFK Airport. We were on a flight with 300 other people who were making Aliyah.
Wow.
All of us were moving to Israel. The pilot begins to speak to us, and it has an Israeli accent, presumably a former Israeli Air Force pilot, goes through the whole routine about the flight, and then he says, "Everybody sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight. I'm here to take you home."
Wow.
Think about this for a moment. 2,000 years of exile.
Yeah.
Roaming around from continent to continent, country to country, and every one of them, except for the kingdom of kindness in the United States, we've suffered and been persecuted. And God fulfills his word and says, I'm going to bring you back. There's no story like this in world history. So what I would love for your viewers and listeners to think about is just State of Israel, IDF, Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Iran, and these are all things we have to talk about and learn from and guard ourselves from. But we're people of faith, and as people of faith, we should wake up every day and say, thank you, God, that I'm living in a time where I can see on a daily basis your prophecies, your word coming true. And that's what Israel represents.
Yeah. Well, Dov, a lot of evangelical Christians think a lot about how prophecies apply to the future. And we kind of take some of our inspiration from some of the apostles like Peter, who said, the prophets who prophesied about the grace that would come to you carefully investigated and searched out what all of this meant. And they realized it wasn't about them, it was about you, that they were serving you through these prophecies. But I think it's interesting for evangelical Christians to know that we aren't the only ones who look to the fulfillment of prophecy. The Jewish people look to the fulfillment of prophecy as well. And just before the show began, you mentioned something about this. I'd love for you to just share what you're thinking.
Sure. We all live in a time where, first of all, we live in a world which is very much bereft of faith and the light that comes through a life that brings God into our world. And I feel that I'm going to take a step back for a moment. When I was elected to the parliament in Israel, the Knesset, in 2013, because I speak English as a mother tongue, they sent me to parliaments all around the world and college campuses and talk about Israel. And I was astonished by the anti-Israel rhetoric, by the revisionist history, by the outright falsehoods that we see. But then at the same time, I was introduced to Christian leaders who come to Israel and support Israel and pray for Israel and so passionate about Israel. And I realized at that moment that we have a bond, Jews and believing Christians, that needs to be nurtured and strengthened and expanded because of what we can mean to each other. You as evangelical Christians are not alone in the world when you see a world and you say, where's the faith? Where's the light? Where's the truth? Right? Yeah. And we feel the same way. And now all of a sudden we can be brothers and sisters in this and support one another in this effort. And that has been one of the greatest lessons that I've learned in my public life in Israel, to be able to travel to places around the world, to churches around the world, to meet Christian delegations that come to Israel from around the world, and each one of us be able to give strength from one to the other. I wrote a book a few years ago. It's called Fact Over Fiction.
Okay.
It's a challenge to Barack Obama's history of Israel. I was shocked when I read his autobiography. Chapter 25 is about Israel, because sentence after sentence was a revisionist history, not rooted in anything biblical or factual, for that matter. And I realized that I have to put that word out there. And along the way, I've been learning that Christians have been doing this all along and standing up and saying, there's truth and there's falsehood. Yeah. There's God and there's a world bereft of God. There's a life that's built on the Bible and prophecy. And so the fact that we have prophecies that we both believe in together, and we're not living our lives just in the day-to-day, get through my day, but we're striving towards something, striving towards bringing the world to a better place. That brotherhood is something which I have such gratitude for, and I just hope that the evangelical Christians recognize that we are the brothers and sisters in this effort, and that's another part of the relationship with Israel that they can benefit from.
See, I find that so fascinating, because the people who have the hardest time finding a sense of purpose in life are the ones who've lost any sense of vision for what they ought to be moving toward. Well, Scripture gives us this, exactly what we can be moving toward. And to watch what's happening in Israel right now as the fulfillment of prophecy is extraordinary. Now, everybody who's watching or listening, there are two groups of people who have been to Israel and people who wish they could go. Right. So we're definitely fans there. But when you're taking a tour of Israel, you don't see sort of the nitty-gritty of what has to go into the development of a nation. When you were in the Knesset, I mean, you can testify about this. It's not nice and calm and peaceful like the United States Senate. Right. It's a little crazy.
Yes, it is.
And people are tempers flare, and things are difficult, and you have to negotiate, and it's hard. But hard is not bad if you have a vision for where you're going.
I'm going to take your point and bring it to a whole other place, but it's the same point. For 2,000 years, the Jewish people, wherever they were persecuted. They were persecuted, they were murdered, pogroms, inquisitions, Holocaust, certainly. How did they get through that? How is it possible? Nobody in world history has experienced that.
Yeah.
And all the ones who tried to destroy us are gone, and we're the ones who are here. It's
Amazing.
because we had a vision. It's because twice a year on Yom Kippur Eve, on the Day of Atonement, and on Passover, we said, Lashana haba b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. You're sitting in a ghetto or in a concentration camp, and you're saying next year in Jerusalem. That's what gets you through, because you know there's a God. You know there's a God of Israel who said, the time will come and I'll remember the covenant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And they believed that if I just hold on and keep that vision of next year in Jerusalem, I can get through this. And that's how we've gotten through it. So even in the day-to-day of Israel, of things ranging from how do we decide how to collect the garbage to how do we deal with Iran and everything in between, there's debate, there's discussion. It's not pleasant. It's often not enjoyable. But all of us are coming from the same place of where we're fighting or debating and working towards establishing the Jewish state of Israel in the 21st century after 2,000 years of being in exile. And that keeps you going through everything. And people talk about, oh, will Israel fall apart about this issue or that issue? Israel's not going to fall apart about any issue because we're going to fight it out. We'll debate it out. We'll deal with the nations of the world that are against us. And then God's word is going to come true anyway, and we'll emerge on the other side. And it's just our ability to play a role in that process. By the way, even moving to Israel, okay? Something which sounds so glorious, in gathering with exiles. There's details along the way of documentation and shipping your furniture to the country and getting settled and finding employment and getting your children to school, learning Hebrew. I sent my son to school, second grade, 7 years old. He came home from school the first day. I said, "How was school today?" He said, "I have no idea. I don't know what anybody said today." That's we chuckle about it now, but that's difficult. That's hard. But we know that anything worthwhile in life is challenging and hard, and you work through it. But it's like exactly what you said. It's with a vision, and it's a vision that you know that there's a God, and there's a God who is ultimately running the show. And my goal is just to try to fulfill His word. With that, you can get through anything.
Hey, it's Dr. Jeff. Thank you so much for engaging with the Dr. Jeff Show podcast. I'd love to talk with you about something that's really tough, but very hopeful at the same time. Recent studies are showing us there's a crisis of young people dropping out from church and walking away from their faith. George Barna's recent American Worldview Inventory found that only 1% of 18 to 29-year-olds have a biblical worldview. Well, that's where Summit Ministries steps in. According to a recent study we conducted with our Summit graduates of our summer student conferences, more than 96% said their faith was strong, that they were committed to living according to a biblical worldview. In this cultural moment, the rising generation is facing constant challenges to their faith. Students are pressured into gender lies, surrounded by sexual confusion, and they risk being ostracized for standing firm. We see students come to life when they find confidence in the foundations of a biblical Christian faith and learning how to think critically about what is happening in the world around them. So you can help with this. You can help build a strong foundation with a financial gift to Summit Ministries. 1 hour of training for a student is $33. You can empower a student to live boldly and give them an unshakable faith, and one of the key topics that might light them up for the rest of their lives. And your gift is tax deductible. So please go to summit.org/match to make a gift that you'll never regret giving, because it will help strengthen the faith of the rising generation. That's summit.org/match. And through the generosity of others, every gift given before January 1st, 2024 will be matched up to $500,000. So you give, every dollar you give becomes $2 because of this match. I am hoping we could see 1,000 hours of training sponsored from this podcast. That's $33,000 to see 1,000 hours of training delivered to those who are going to be the future leaders of our nation, whether they're trained or not. Let's train them to embrace a biblical worldview and to embrace God's truth in everything. Go to summit.org/match. It occurs to me, we know this is true with things like exercise. If you go to the gym and say, I really, really, really want to get in shape, give me the lightest possible weights and the easiest workout. Well, then the coach will say, I think you're missing the entire point.
Right.
We sometimes think, though, in life that if the path is not easy, it's not the right path. What do Americans need to learn from Israel about that?
I would love for the average American to sit back for a moment and imagine the following scenario that I'm going to describe to you. 2 weeks ago, Friday afternoon, getting ready for the Sabbath in my city where I live in Beit Shemesh, and all of a sudden, air raid siren goes off. And you have 20 seconds to find cover because Islamic jihadists are sending missiles to kill our innocent people, our innocent women and children. That would sound like something that would break a people. Break a people. How are these children functioning? How are they getting out of bed in the morning? How are you going to work the next day? How do you enjoy a ball game? How do you, right? Literally, a missile can be sent at any time from these people who are determined to annihilate us. But we say just the opposite. We say, it says in Exodus that when Pharaoh, the more he persecuted the people of Israel, the more they multiplied. You're gonna try to push against us, we're gonna come out even stronger. Our response to those who seek to destroy Israel and the Jewish people and people of faith in God is to strengthen our faith and to strengthen our commitment to that land and bring even more people here. Because we know in the end we are going to win. This is not a question of if. It's God's promise. Look what God has done after 2,000 years. We're building this country. No one could write such a story. So because we know the end is going to be good and is going to be victorious, that gives us the strength to say, every time you hurt us and try to knock us down, we're going to come back even stronger. I know that Americans right now and people of faith are dealing with a world that's bombarding them with values that are anti-Christian, anti-biblical, anti-God. And there might be times when you feel like, I just want to go into a little corner, close my eyes, close my mouth, and just live my life without dealing. It should be just the opposite. Learn from us in Israel that stand up, be even stronger. And if you're trying to hurt my values and my children, I'm going to come out even stronger. I'm going to be more vocal. I'm going to be more proactive. I'm going to do more to get legislators into office that speak to my values. And we're going to work to bring even more light into this world. And that's what we do in Israel.
Yeah. This is really inspirational. I'm thinking back to a couple of specific instances in history where God sending his people into the desert was an act of love and an invitation to a relationship. So coming out of Egypt, the children of Israel immediately went into a desert. And I've been there. I know, but it's like desert. There's nothing to sustain life there. They had to be strengthened to be prepared to not let the promised land overwhelm them so that they became fat and lazy, right?
Correct. That the 40 years in the desert gave them what they needed to be able to begin to function in the promised land. Because otherwise, exactly right, they would just sit back, become lazy, like you said, and even lose faith along the way. So they had to be emboldened and strengthened and learn to rely on God during that experience so that can be then transformed to their times in Israel.
And Jesus' followers will recognize this same thing happening. Jesus was baptized. The Spirit descended from heaven as a dove, according to Matthew chapter 3. The voice of God was heard to say, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased." And we stop there. But Jesus' followers need to go on to Matthew 4, verse 1, and Jesus was sent into the desert to be tempted by Satan for 40 days. So the number 40 shows up again.
Absolutely.
And it was an act of love preparing Jesus for his mission that sent him into the desert. It's just so important for us to understand that our being in a desert right now does not mean that God has abandoned us. It means that he's with us more than ever.
Exactly. It's 100% the case. And we know that no one achieves, no one accomplishes without going through those hard times and those challenging times and times that require real work. I loved your example of the fitness center and working out, right? That feeling you have after you work up that sweat, you feel great. You just have to get yourself to the point of doing it.
Yeah.
And in this case, it's 100% the case. My wife and I were just blessed with the birth of a granddaughter, and I'm watching this little baby crying, and it's hard. And now that I'm a grandparent looking at it this way, I'm like, wow, the way God created the world is that from our infancy, we're trained that things are challenging, things are difficult. But what do I do when it's difficult? I don't give up. I cry out for help.
Yeah.
I cry out to mom and dad. I cry out to God and work through it. And the child wants to work through it. And as they learn to walk, they'll fall every few feet and they just pick themselves up and keep on going. And that's how they learn to accomplish and to achieve. And we in Israel, from the very inception, think about this for a moment. We declare our independence in May 1948, and instantaneously we're surrounded on all sides by enemies who attack us.
Yeah.
The moment you have this great moment, it's a God moment, and then we go right to war. And Holocaust survivors get off the boat to the promised land and they're handed a rifle and told, now go fight.
Wow.
That's enough to tell somebody, okay, I'm done. I'm going to go to Hawaii. I don't need this. But here's the amazing statistic. They just rated the happiest countries in the world. The top 3 are Scandinavian countries. Okay, no conflict, just sit back. And number 4 is Israel.
Wow.
Number 17 is the United States of America.
Wow.
How is that possible? How is it possible that a country that deals with Palestinian terrorism, Islamic jihadist attacks from all around our borders, not an easy place to live? Because they're living a life of meaning, they're living a life of purpose, and we see those challenges as just there to make us even closer to God and make us greater people.
Yeah. This is really great. It's so fun to hear hear these stories. I'd love to think just for a moment about how Christians can work together with Jewish people in the pursuit of God's plan.
The starting point for me is prayer. That's the starting point. Just the reality that every day we can sit down together from wherever we are and pray for the same goals. And certainly when it comes to Israel, a strong, safe Israel, that's the starting point from my perspective. But then when you go further, I know that in my work, and I have run an organization called Yad Le'olim. People can read about it at yadleolim.org. You can see the prophecies coming true before our eyes.
Yeah.
And people around the world say, can we partner with you in this effort? I'm sitting back in whatever country or state that I'm in, but I can help Jews make Israel their home and fulfill the prophecy in gathering with exiles. I want to be part of that. So that's another way. People can go to the website and learn how to partner together with us on that effort. And finally, it sounds like it's political in nature, but it's, from my perspective, divine work in nature, and that is the elections and getting people into office, decision makers who are people of faith, who are people of truth. You can't sit back and just say, okay, I'll let God do what God. No, God wants us to be partners with him. And from a state level, from a local level to a state level to a national level, to make sure that we are active and putting people into office who are going to be supportive of biblical initiatives, of truth and Israel. I, as a member of parliament, I was sent to Congress many times to meet with members of Congress, and it's a joy when I can sit in a room with a senator or a representative who's believing in God, devout Christian, and wakes up every day supportive of Israel. But we need that because we don't take it for granted. When that air raid siren went off, and I heard a boom which shook my building, it wasn't from the missile landing. It was from the Iron Dome that intercepted the missile before it landed in my city.
Yeah.
That's a joint U.S.-Israeli effort. It's joint U.S.-Israeli technology. It's joint U.S.-Israeli funding. And that's real important because, we just say it and we say, oh, missiles. There are hundreds and hundreds of missiles fired at our cities. And through this relationship, I call it the triangle. It's God, Israel, U.S. We had these missiles that took them out, and they didn't land in our cities. But it's because there are U.S. leaders who believe in that and are willing to say that our funding in the United States should go towards that effort, because a strong Israel also means a strong United States. So prayer, support for organizations like mine, and working to make sure that people get into office who share these values. Those are the things that I would suggest.
Okay, that's a great list. Dov, one last question for you. When we see the news about Israel, it's almost always about conflict. Okay, conflict. America's news is commercial. People make money selling commercials by getting you to stay tuned in.
Right.
And bad news keeps you tuned in. Bad news is based on conflict. So it's only the conflict that people ever see in Israel. If people want to go behind the scenes and get news that helps give a different perspective to the anti-Israel, now, you may end up in a lot of different places. I know a lot of people are going, yeah, Israel, Palestine, I'm not so sure how, I'm not sure I believe the Israelis and, all of that. But if they want to get at some information that they're not going to get in the mainstream media, where should they go?
So first of all, and I want to be clear, I make like a penny for each book that's sold. So this is not a effort to walk away from this earning money. I want people to know truth. You go online and look at Fact Over Fiction, a challenge to Barack Obama's history of Israel, because it basically tells the whole story of Israel through a perspective of truth. That's not the daily news, but that's just, if you want to really understand what's happening, that's part one. There are a few news sites that I would definitely recommend. I'm actually here at NRB with Israel 365, and I know that they put out news regularly. There's something called IsraelNationalNews.com, which also gives a real honest perspective. And I would also say, though, that, there's all kinds of, this ILTV, for example, that they tell stories about what's happening in Israel. This is not just about conflict and war. Learn about wineries in Israel. Learn about charity organizations that are doing so much kindness in Israel. Learn about how Israel is a place where people of all faiths can worship freely. And then finally, I'm just going to say this because you mentioned there are some who have been to Israel, some who haven't. Come to Israel. I have not met a Christian who has visited Israel who hasn't said that it has transformed their relationship with Israel, but even more importantly, their relationship with God. It transforms them spiritually, and they view it as the most important visit they've made in their lives. And that's something which I recommend to everyone. And if anyone wants advice about how to make it a great trip, you can reach out to me, dov@yadleolim.org. It would be my pleasure to guide anyone through that process.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Yeah. Well, start saving up for this, because you're absolutely right in that. Dov, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much. God bless you.
Thank you to Rabbi Dov Lipman for coming on the show. If you enjoyed the show, would you consider leaving a review on your favorite platform? Reviews help more people find the show. And if you want more resources that can help you live out a biblical worldview, whether you're a student, a parent, educator, or church leader, go to summit.org/resources. You'll find a bunch of articles, videos, ebooks, and more there for your edification. We'll see you next week. Hey, are you looking for more great podcasts that can help build your faith and give you inspiration? Our friends at Edify have what you need. You can find more podcasts, including the Dr. Jeff Show podcast, on the Edify app. You download it at edify.app or search for it in the Apple Store or the Google Play Store. Spell Edify, EDIFI.